Hi, and welcome to today's episode of Women's Health Unwrapped. Thank you for joining today. It's great to have you on board. I think today is going to be a conversation that resonates with many of you because we're going to explore how the changes that you want to make and that you keep trying to implement fail to stick. So if you've ever tried to launch a wellness or a health campaign and get it kick-started, but find that by maybe weeks or even days it's fallen by the wayside, then today's conversation is definitely for you. I'm joined by Sharon Donato, who is going to help us unwrap why so many of us fail to make lasting change. And we're going to talk about it through the lens of trauma, because Sharon is a trauma coach. She's also a certified athletic trainer and strength and conditioning specialist. She's got over 30 years of experience, and she really helps people to connect with their mind, body and spirit so that they can heal from within. And we've covered trauma in many different ways on previous episodes, but every one of them I think has so much relevance because essentially they're connected, but it's just that different perspective and perhaps the modalities that particular person, the guest on the podcast episode, uses that can resonate with you. So I'm excited to chat more about this with Sharon, and welcome to the podcast, Sharon.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here and talking about this topic. It's really important.
Yeah, and you and I have chatted previously in advance of the episode, and you have, like I say, some different modalities and a different approach, and obviously your own story and journey into this that makes what you do quite unique and something I'm personally really interested in as well, because so many people do start over again to build those new healthier habits and improve their lifestyle and fail. And we hear that and we see that frustration so much in our world, don't we? So just to get us started, I'd love to know from you what your own most impactful healthy habit is.
Oh, wow. I'd say my most impactful healthy habit is just taking sleep really seriously. I think, we get busy, we underestimate the importance of just resting, rejuvenating. Even when you're learning new things, everything becomes solid when you sleep. That's when we rebuild, that's when we rejuvenate, that's when we learn, like when we imprint learning. So, it's one of the things that goes by the wayside for so many people, or just having really disjointed, just not quality sleep, and it affects everything you do throughout the day. So I think really guarding my sleep routines and the amount of time that I spend, even if it's not sleeping, just resting, has been really impactful for me.
Absolutely. And sleep for probably the last 3 years has been the main habit that I've wanted to improve, or the main pillar of my wellness. And it's something I do continue to personally struggle with, despite having all of the tools in my toolkit. But yeah, so many people undervalue sleep and
Mm-hmm.
the role of good quality sleep. And yeah, it is a pillar that then lifts up so much, and definitely for today's conversation is relevant, because if you are exhausted and tired and lacking energy, then trying to make those new changes is going to feel even harder and potentially set you up for failing. So yeah, it'd be interesting to see how that comes through as we chat through our
Yeah.
conversation today. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
I almost feel
go
like
on.
society sees it as like this badge of honor that you can function on a little bit of sleep. We just not recognizing the importance of it, and also that, it often can get labeled as lazy. Even if you're just resting, if you just, your body or your mind needs rest, even for ourselves, we can beat ourselves up feeling like, oh, I'm so lazy, I didn't get anything done today. Well, no, you rested. Like, that's really, really important. And when your body knows that you need that, you've got to give it permission to do that. Or you're just, defeating the purpose of the rest if you're going to beat yourself up about resting.
Absolutely. And I've
Yeah.
had a full episode actually with a guest, I think it was right at the start of this year, all about rest and how rest isn't just sleep, and there are so many ways to rest, both your mind, your body, and your spirit, so that you're emotionally rested as well. And
Yes.
that's something I think particularly for women is a struggle, because there's that guilt attached to
Hmm.
resting, and sometimes that might mean doing nothing, but there are active ways to rest as well. Yeah, so it's such an important thing. And culturally, as you touched on, there has been this perception that there's time to sleep when you're dead. Let's just play hard, go at it hard, and put sleep aside. And I think sleep's one of the areas of wellness that is in its infancy with
Hmm.
knowledge and awareness. I think we've got a lot better around nutrition and exercise, and then stress has followed. But I think sleep's still got a lot of way to come to help people see how important it is. So, to get into the meat of our topic today, Sharon, let's start with why so many people struggle, and what do you see in your clients that is holding them back from making successful changes?
Yeah. So, I think that we use this term habits, and it seems just this really simple, basic understanding of the things that we do, that we have these habits. And I tend to think of them a little bit more deeply as like patterns of behavior. And, you may think that, something is a habit when really it's a pattern that might be reflecting in a lot of different behaviors, but you have no idea that they're all connected, because so much of our patterns are, are unconscious. We don't even necessarily recognize that the way we're approaching things or doing things is our pattern of behavior. And those patterns, they develop pretty young, for a lot of different reasons. And, we, you know, are here to talk a little bit about how that trauma piece, fits into that. But many of our patterns, especially the unhealthy patterns, are formed because of experiences we have as a child. So, when we're trying to make lasting change, we've got to get to the root of those patterns of behavior rather than just superficially thinking about changing a habit. You can say, oh, I'm going to drink more water, you know, knowing that that is going to help, you feel healthier, for your body to function better at a higher level physiologically. But then why do you end up not drinking more water? It's very simple, right? You just fill up a glass of water and you drink it. But then next thing you know, you go 3 days in, you're like, yeah, I haven't, inserted that new, kind of behavior into, or habit into what I'm doing. Why am I not doing that? And that's that why piece that we really have to get to the root of. And it can be really profound. It's, when you start to look at these things and you start to connect the dots and just become more aware of why you do what you do, or why you don't do things that are healthy. That's kind of where the sweet spot is, because once you have an awareness around it, now you have a much better ability to make change than just those automatic things.
And I love that you've used the word awareness there. I talk about that a lot. And that really is so key, isn't it? Because as you were describing that example with the water, I was thinking of how real that is, and not just on water, but maybe it's to eat less sweets or chocolate, and skip that mid-afternoon snack, or getting off your phone early on a night to get to bed, and before you know it, it's 5 days later and you go, oh, actually I'm still on the phone every night, I've forgotten all about it. And so that
Yeah.
awareness is a really important starting point, isn't it? And I think it's a struggle because of the busy lives many of us
Hmm.
lead, and the way, the world just is, especially for women. How do you start to get that awareness? What would you advise somebody to do to become more self-aware?
So, when you start to kind of deconstruct some of these things. So say I'm working with a client who we can stay with that water one. It's a pretty easy one, and it's pretty straightforward, right? Like, just drink more water. Um, and when the person, says, well, the first day I did great. And then the next day, I had to work 12 hours, and I got really busy at work, and I didn't think about it. And before I knew it, half the day had gone by and I hadn't had any water. Now you say, well, why are you so why are you so busy? so you're busy doing what? Well, I had to do this, I had to do this, I had to do this. Now you start to see someone who maybe is spread really thin, who doesn't have the ability to say no, who isn't, setting their own boundaries and recognizing if the drinking more water is the priority, why are we putting all these other things in front of it? It's literally takes you 5 seconds to take a sip of water. So it's not the water, it's the busyness. Now we're looking at, okay, so you're taking on more than you can do, or and are some of those things that you can say no to. Now you're finding someone who maybe doesn't have boundaries. So it's not the water. And so frequently when we're trying to make habits, we really just get caught up on that habit instead of looking at well, are you taking on too much? Why are you, doing the carpool every day instead of splitting that time with someone else? Now it becomes, the next layer of that. Maybe you're trying to people please, or you're trying to, you don't like to say no because it makes you feel a certain way. So it's really deconstructing that basic level. So it's so frequently when I'm working on health coaching with someone, we end up talking about this other layer of, why can't you say no when your neighbor asks you to, help with this thing? Why do you feel like that's a reflection on you if you say, I'm really sorry, I can't take that on today? So it's not the water.
Yeah. And I'm smiling because, it's just so common, isn't it? In that, like, you feel like it's going to be easy to do something because you've decided you want it. You've decided, I'm going to drink more water because I know that I'm going to feel more energized. It's going to hopefully help with some of perhaps what I think are hunger cravings, but are not. It's, about hydration. It's good for helping your whole body to work in the optimal way and great for your skin and all of those benefits. So you tick, tick, tick. Yeah, I'm going to drink more water. But then it just doesn't happen. And as you say, it's a great example to use here because it's something that doesn't cost anything generally and is very quick to do and should be very easy. But in terms of actually implementing it is as difficult as any other habit for lots of people. And so getting underneath those layers, as you say, is so important. And that's what many people struggle with when they are embarking on a journey of change themselves. And this could be anything. Obviously, we are talking about health because that's what the podcast is and what we both do. But, this could be about saving money for a holiday, and you want the holiday and you know how the family are going to feel having that great holiday together, but you can't help keep spending on Amazon or takeaways, or and then before you know 3 months have gone and you haven't saved a penny. And so it can seem on the surface like it should be very simple, but then you are, as you explained, falling into those patterns and learned behaviors that mean you don't do that thing you really do want to do. So how does trauma come into that? Because trauma can be something, and guests who've been on this topic, we've talked about it, but I'd love you to just describe what you define as trauma as well, because I think if someone isn't in our world of having this knowledge, trauma often feels like it has to be something really serious, doesn't it? Like really big, and therefore often people don't bring this into the equation when they are trying to make improvements in their health and life.
Yeah, and it's kind of, it's talked about, it's kind of that one of those fad things right now. There's so many people talk about it, and I think sometimes that can be a turnoff for people who don't really understand what it is, and they're thinking in terms of these, big, war torn, a refugee or someone, surviving a house fire or war. We really started talking about trauma with veterans. That's really one of the first places that started. So I think sometimes people, they almost feel like it's disrespectful to use that phrase. But, when you take all of the emotion out of it, what trauma really is, negative, impactful experiences that we have not properly processed or timestamped in our system. So, bad things do happen to everyone. Everyone has their experiences, and that's all relative, right? It's, if you've led a, relatively comfortable life, there are still things that have happened to you that can create, trauma in your system. Um, People who, go through an experience and talk about it afterwards, perhaps they seek counseling, or it's, they live in a family where it's okay to talk about your emotions and how you feel about it, are much, much less likely to have some of this, after effects of trauma. It's not that, they forget what happened, but they've been allowed to properly process it. So often, when people go through a negative, impactful experience and they don't process that experience, our system remembers everything. If you think of us as like an organism, like any other animal, it is designed to keep us alive. It is not designed to keep us happy. So we learn from these negative experiences, and we know how maybe we survived that. Maybe we survived, even chronic experiences, chronic negative experiences that can kind of form a trauma. Maybe you had an overbearing parent who just felt like you could never do anything right. And, over time, you learned as an organism, how do I survive that? Maybe it's making yourself small. Maybe it's, being a people pleaser. It's, we have these parts that kind of come in and protect us. And that is what forms some of these patterns of behavior. Maybe you're the reason you can't drink water is because you're a people pleaser. Like it sounds silly to link all that together, but if you're always trying to make everybody happy and comfortable around you because that keeps the peace, that keeps you from feeling that same feeling you felt when you were a child, then that you're going to put everybody else before yourself. So it's, I think we have to deconstruct a little bit what trauma really means, and take a little bit of its power away. I mean, we have to respect what it can do to us, but we also can't just think of it as those big, massive things that happen, that make the news, because so many people are, dealing with these, especially the micro chronic type things, that form our behaviors.
I think a lot of people feel like to have had trauma, you have to have been a victim in some way. And
Yeah.
therefore, as you say, I think there's kind of two sides to it. One is that it's been made this great big thing, which it can be and absolutely is. As you gave some of those examples about the big traumas like war experience, and maybe being part of a severe car crash, for example, where you perhaps were severely injured or someone else in the accident was. So there are those types of ones that are very real, but then, as you described, there are many other ways that as humans we experience trauma. That doesn't mean we've been a victim and know about it as well. That a lot of trauma is stored and carried without us remembering it, especially those very early traumas from childhood. And something as simple as, or as well, seemingly unmeaningful at the time, especially when you're young, could be just a passing comment from a relative or a friend, someone in the school playground. But that could create something in you that then plays out in how you are as a person and that operating system within you, isn't it? And is that what you're talking about then, Sharon, how that is within us and that then creates those actions in how we behave that can then sabotage the things that we try to do consciously with the changes we might want at different times of our life?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that's a great example of something as innocuous as, a comment made, at school, maybe by a teacher. As a child, we have we're like sponges, and we have such little information to go off of. So if you, have maybe a teacher who, is not treating a child in a positive way, or is, kind of putting them down, that child is going to, if they're not given the space and the opportunity to talk about it and say how it makes them feel and have an adult help them weed through that, they're just going to decide that, I'm not good enough. Nothing I can do, nothing I do pleases this teacher or this parent or whatever that is. They're just going to turn that on themselves and decide, okay, I need to do something different. They're never going to look at that and say, oh, well, it's not appropriate for that teacher to say that thing to me. So, having spaces for kids to be able to say, this is what happened in school today, and this, how did it make you feel? And, that's processing a negative experience, then is much less likely to become kind of trauma based, or the start of a trauma, because it's been processed. It's been properly time stamped in your system. Now it's in the past. You're not going to forget that happened, but it's much less likely to have an imprint on how you move forward, in other experiences based on what you've learned.
Mm. And in your journey, what was it that started to shift you to having this knowledge and making changes so that the change you want, the positive change you want to implement, actually happened and became a part of who you were?
Um, wow, that's a great question. I think some of that, can come with age and being able to look backwards and see patterns in your own life. I think I started to learn a lot about, I went through a divorce, pretty tough divorce situation, and started to see some parallels in that relationship to, my family of origin, just my, how I grew up, and, how, I interacted with my parents, and, just starting to be able to kind of connect these dots of the types of people that I had in my life. And, it kind of, you always say, it kind of sends you down the rabbit hole of learning. Um, but just, learning what trauma is and how it shapes who we are, but also, like you said earlier, not being a victim, really kind of, you know, recognizing that these are experiences that I've gone through, and I want to do something different. I want to interact with my environment differently. I think having children often can lead you on that path too, of not wanting to kind of repeat the patterns, because you see that a lot in families. There's kind of generational patterns of how people behave and interact, and it's automatic, right? Like, no one wants to become, like that parent that mistreated them, but so frequently you see it happen, generation after generation.
Yeah.
And that tells you in itself, it's an awareness piece. It's just becoming really aware of your reaction to things, and being an interrupter of that pattern. And you do it on that individual level, but also doing that on a family level as well, of like, I'm interrupting this pattern, like, this is where it stops. So it's really just been, I've been a lifelong learner. I've always just, wanted to keep learning. So finding, some of these connections and connecting these dots, I really connected it to my career as an athletic trainer. It's root cause. Athletic training and sports medicine is often finding the root cause of why people are injured. It's a physical piece, but it's still the root cause of how did we end up here, and what can we change so that we interrupt that pattern.
And that brings us on nicely to what I would like to talk about next, which is that physical impact and result of having that trauma, or having those, maybe you might not want to think about it as trauma, but having those habits and behaviours a part of who you are that are holding you back from improving your health, from putting new habits in place. Because as you focus on the mind and body and spirit, whichever way you think about that, your soul is all connected. And that, in my story, was a big, big miss. I never connected the mind and body. I started to struggle with anxiety and panic disorder at 19. It wasn't diagnosed for about 13 plus years.
Wow.
And I focused on the mental health problems as a brain issue. There's something inherently wrong with my brain. And then the physical health problems that I started to experience, and then just the general way that I felt, were separate. They had a cause which wasn't linked to what was going on in my mind. They had to be from the part that might have been struggling with, health wise, that root cause was there. And when I learned this mind body connection, I just had this relief of understanding that, gave me so much empowerment to change the way that I thought and judged myself. That was a big part of it. So it's really something I would like people to understand and piece together to help in their journey, because I think we can be quite hard on ourselves as women when we aren't making the changes we want and we're not feeling as healthy as we would like to be. And also perhaps getting frustrated and maybe a bit down about some of the ongoing physical challenges, or maybe just little ailments or problems that you have that are holding you back from being really healthy, strong, and happy.
Yeah, you raise a really good point of how we kind of try to separate all this, and I think our medical system has, systems have done that to us, where we're trying to treat things in silos, and there's absolutely a place for talk therapy, and it's an incredibly valuable tool. Um, in the whole scheme of treating a person. And I think frequently it's almost like we're just taking the head and we're putting it over here and trying to deal with it, and we're not recognizing, it's kind of like a top down, and what some of this approach does is it flips it over, and it creates more of this kind of bottom up treatment where you're working with the body. And our nervous system is in our entire body. It's not just the head. So that may be the thinking part of it, but there's
Mm.
all the rest of this just amazing piece of equipment that is designed to keep us alive. And when we start to look at the body, and like you said, it so often takes years and years for medicine to, like, figure out what's going on with us. I don't even want to say what's wrong, because it's actually a miracle that our system does protect us in this way. But with its best loving intention, it also can be causing damage along the way. And I think something you said made me think about just our reaction to stressors and anxiety and those kind of things. And it creates cortisol. And
Mm.
cortisol, while really important for us if we're, running away from, an animal in the jungle, it doesn't do us any favors in our everyday. It is an incredibly powerful hormone that can have a really negative impact on us. If we are under chronic stress or we're feeling chronic anxiety, we're releasing cortisol, releasing cortisol, releasing cortisol. And over decades, that has a real negative impact on our health. That was one of the things for me. I was diagnosed with, an autoimmune thyroid disorder, which really probably started with my adrenals, with, my body just constantly creating cortisol to, navigate through these situations that I was perceiving as dangerous based on, different trauma that I had experienced. So
Mm.
it's, we it's kind of that full circle thing. Your body is doing everything it can to survive, but it's also damaging you at the same time if we don't learn how to have the awareness, take a step back. This situation may be uncomfortable, but it's not dangerous. Recognizing when we get worked up over something, well, I'm not in danger right now. My system thinks this is dangerous because it doesn't like how this feels. And it's connecting to something, kind of way back in time that maybe at that time was dangerous or did feel, like it was more dangerous. But as grown-ups, we keep kind of behaving that way. We're really doing a lot of damage to our systems by not having awareness around that.
And I think the society and culture that we're a part of, certainly in westernized, developed countries, is one that celebrates that way of living as well. That
Mhm.
be on the go, work really hard. We touched on glorifying lack of sleep at the beginning. It's a bit the same, I think, with stress, especially in a lot of corporate type environments where it's, kind of the done thing to work really hard, stay very late, and then celebrate that, even though you know that it's a real struggle and it's exhausting you. And
Yeah.
and so we kind of run on this adrenaline part of being in high stress. And that, for me, when I learned about this stuff, was a real worry, because I'd spent 26 of my adult years in that heightened state of stress, and not knowing what it was doing to my nervous system, and then what that nervous system was doing to the machine that it's part of, as you said, with this human and so on. And that's scary to think I spent that long in that state. And it's still, there's no finish line to any of this, is that we have to continuously look after ourselves, but it does become easier when we make the habits, the behaviours, a part of who we are. But it's so important to have this awareness. This word keeps coming up, and I do love the word awareness. I think it's such an important place for anyone to start. And yeah, just to realize how everything is so interconnected, and that we have to be in control of our bodily systems and that nervous system, because it's very, very, very easy and normal for it to be in control of us, isn't it? And that's the wrong way round.
Yeah, I always say the pandemic has this silver lining for me, is it was this forced shutdown.
Yeah.
And I was very aware of the shift, and all of a sudden having all this time. And I often said to people during that time, I used to say I didn't exercise because I didn't have time. I now know that's not true, right? Like, that's the awareness. Like, clearly it wasn't a time issue, because I didn't all of a sudden start exercising every single day at the beginning of the pandemic. And I did have a lot of time. So it was a real seminal moment for me where I said, I'm not going back to that rat race. There are going to be boundaries. There is going to be a shift in the way we're doing things, because I'm not going back there. It was absolutely so unhealthy. Especially if you have children, it's this really slow creep of busyness and overdoing and overcommitting that you don't really see it happening until, you're so deep into it that, you're running these 14, 16-hour days, where it just seems like you never sit down. And I think that was something for me that I will always believe was a really positive shift of the pandemic, where it really said, no, that what you were doing back then it can't happen again. Now there's going to be some harder boundaries, and we're going to be a little more careful about what we're doing with our energy, and how hard we're pushing. So it's like you said, it's that awareness and being curious about how you're feeling about certain things, just kind of stopping and maybe not knowing the answer, but wondering, having that time to just kind of wonder, why am I feeling that way? Or, why is this a thing that's happening, and allowing yourself the space to think about some of those things instead of this just automatic way that we live.
And for many people, that space came in the pandemic. Not everyone didn't work. I worked at home. It was different. Life was different. And the lockdown meant we had so much less possibility in what we did in our day in terms of travel and going out and seeing friends and family and so on. And I think having that enforced space enabled lots of people to reflect, probably for the first time as an adult, especially I think in our generation, of how they were feeling, because that's one of the most important things when you are, well, not just when you are trying to improve your health, but I think just in life full stop, is to keep having those micro pauses in whatever way that looks like. Again, doesn't have to be doing nothing. You could be on a walk, but just having that headspace of, how am I feeling? How is life at the minute? Am I where I want to be? Am I in control? Am I being intentional? We often don't make that a part of who we are. And I think the pandemic did grace us, really gift us with that space to do that. And for those people that I know of or have heard talking about this, like yourself, that was such an incredible positive outcome of the pandemic that enabled them to reflect and make changes to live better afterwards. But what I'm definitely now hearing is that has started to reverse. So those people who did want to make life different and could, did that as we shifted out of the pandemic. But now, how many years, 4 years, almost 5 years forward, people are starting to revert back. And we're seeing that in the rise in burnout and stress and mental health illnesses as well. Lots and lots of stats on that, especially in the younger generation. So yeah, that's really, I think, something that we don't want to lose the memory of, because it was very powerful in lots of ways. So yeah, thanks for bringing that up, because I think it's something
Yeah.
which we all need to just keep reminding ourselves of, and thinking about what we'd promised ourselves perhaps in the
Yeah.
pandemic. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So one of the things I know you specialize in, Sharon, is brain spotting, which
Yeah.
you use as a tool, one of the modalities in how you work with people to help them, balance out that mind, body, spirit connection and move and heal from trauma to be able to move forward and build those habits and new behaviors into their life. So tell me a little bit about that, because that's something that I've heard very little and know little about.
Yeah. So, brain spotting is a tool that can be used kind of, I get it can be used as a standalone tool, but the way I use it is within my coaching. When we come across some of these patterns, and we find these patterns of behavior when I'm working with a client. Often our patterns are, they're in our nervous system. They're kind of, for lack of a better word, kind of trapped in our nervous system. Often can be because of this, kind of past traumas that we talked about. And what brain spotting does is it bypasses the thinking brain. So, when I do brain spotting with someone, we're not talking about their trauma. I'm not a therapist. We're not, piecing together or picking apart in a verbal way. What brain spotting does is if you through the eyes, you're using the eyes. It's very simple as far as the setup. There's a wand, and the person, we find a an access point, for lack of a better word, where they kind of just feel some activation in their body. Because at this point, you've already started talking about, how to become more aware of your somatics, what you're feeling in your body when you're talking about a certain thing. What are you actually feeling in your body when you're talking about that thing? So when you're doing brain spotting, you're bypassing that thinking brain and really just getting straight into the nervous system to kind of move these traumas down the line so that your body can process them out of your system. It's not like you're ripping the lid off of Pandora's box, because sometimes when you talk with people about trying to release trauma, it scares them. They don't know what that's going to look like and what that's going to feel like, and am I going to suddenly be flooded with memories? And it's very powerful, but in a lot of ways it's much more gentle than that. So I often tell people, we're just trying to push it down the line. We're helping your body process that trauma out. So not that you forget about it, but that it doesn't hold that same power over you, because we've allowed it to kind of timestamp in your system. That's often, what happens with people with their trauma, is that if it's not properly time stamped in your system, when you are in a situation that feels familiar to whatever that issue is, you immediately have emotions around it. It's like you're kind of like flipping the lid, off of this old memory that your system doesn't know is old. So, what brain spotting does is it kind of just helps to move those things along and timestamp them properly. And I describe it as, when you have a word on the tip of your tongue and it's there, but
Yeah.
you can't find it.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of the work that I have done myself with brain spotting and then with clients. That's kind of what it feels like afterwards. You're not, forgetting that thing, but you can't really associate an emotion to it anymore. It's just has, um, it's free. It's kind of just been freed, so that
Mm.
you're more able to even talk about it or think about it without it having so much power anymore. It's almost like you're taking the power away from those things, because now your brain knows that was in the past, and right now I'm safe and that doesn't affect me, even if I can remember what it is.
Fascinating. I personally love all of this stuff, and over a long amount of years, I've tried lots of different things when I was trying to fix the problems that I believed
Yeah.
I had. And so, this is what led me to where I am now, because I'd been in the space and interested in the space for my own healing and recovery journey, and learned so much. And I just find it fascinating how there's so many different tools available. And I think if I won the lottery and had lots of money, I'd be definitely tapping into this along with some other ones, because I just think, there's so much we can gain from it, as you said, to move that trauma, move what is holding us back now through our system and release it. And I love that way you've explained about the timestamp, and why, when we haven't processed it properly and haven't put it into that timestamp and into the order of our life as when it happened, is part of the reason why it creates often, challenging thoughts, behaviors, and then the emotions that come with those.
Yeah, and within our brain, our long-term memory is right up against our emotional center. So if things aren't properly time-stamped and you have something that even without you knowing you're triggering that it's familiarity, it's your system feeling like this feels like something. It could be that maybe you had the very critical parent, and now you work for a boss who is really critical. It's because those areas of the brain are so close to each other. When you trigger that long-term memory, the emotional part immediately has that reaction to it. So when you do things like brain spotting, you're just, you're separating those two things. They're not connected in the same way anymore. So it's almost like you're pulling the emotion off of that memory in a sense. And it's very natural. Children brain spot all the time. You ever seen the child that just kind of stares off into space? Or do you remember when you were a kid and you would be staring at something and someone was trying to get your attention? That is a form of self brain spotting. It's something that, we can even almost do just intuitively. That's, it's just how we process. It's just processing.
As you were speaking there, I was thinking about the film Inside Out. I just recently watched Inside Out 2,
Yeah.
and they're both brilliant films. I watched one when it first came out, but I watched it just before watching 2 because I wanted to remind myself about
Yeah.
the story. But 2 was just so good. If you're listening and haven't watched those Disney films, watch them, because I think it explains all of this in such an easy, simple way. Obviously, they're created essentially for children, but also for grown-ups, because, there's complexity to the story, a lot deeper than what a younger child would see and understand. But just, the way that, you've got all of those different emotions, and how the memories are created and the way they're stored in your long-term memory and so on. It's brilliant, isn't it? How it
It
creates who
really
you
is.
are.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It really, I found it to be so clever and really helpful with kids, and trying to help them understand why I have a 13-year-old daughter, so we went to see it together.
Oh,
There
brilliant.
there was definitely some funny moments there that were all too familiar. But yeah, it's such a good movie for adults too, because it's so helpful in understanding how our brains really work. I mean, there's so much to that movie that I feel like is pretty accurate to a lot of the research that's coming out now, and how our brains work. It's pretty cool.
Definitely. I'm sure
Yeah.
Disney hired the best people to
Yeah.
advise on it all and get it right. And I loved how they have those little snippets inside of the mum's brain and the dad's
Yeah.
brain. And especially the mum, and I was thinking, it's like that, midlife menopausal age, and which clashes with the pubescent age range of often your kids, and then how your emotions are so different at that point. And it's brilliant.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just to wrap us up then, Sharon, for someone who's, thinking, right, this is something that's starting to make sense and I can resonate with and feel maybe is going to help me to make some shifts and positive changes. What would be 3 simple steps someone could do themselves to begin on their journey to perhaps work through some of that trauma and be more connected? I think mind and body is what I would say, to start to implement some of those new habits.
Yeah. So, I mean, the one that first pops into my head is something that came up over and over while we were talking, which is awareness, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's being aware of what you're actually doing, is the first piece, that I think is so important, and being curious about that. Like you can be aware, but also being curious. The next question is, well, what could be some reasons that is what's coming up for me. So I'd say that would be the first one. I think being open to change. I think we think we know so much, and what as I've as I've grown older, I think what the most consistent thing I've learned is that I don't know. I have to be open to change and not be so quick to decide what's going to work, what's not going to work. There's a bit of kind of humbling that happens with that, where we can just stay open to new ideas and new ways of doing things. And then I think the third one for me would be not expecting ourselves to be perfect, giving ourselves grace, as we're trying to make some of these changes. And, I think the beating ourselves up when we perceive ourselves as failing is one of the biggest things that leads to more failure. And it's not kind of letting go of all accountability. I think accountability and self accountability is really important, but also just knowing, I did the best I could today, and it didn't go the way I wanted to go. And tomorrow I'm going to start again, and I'm going to start again, and I'm going to start again. And that is often how we can shift habits and kind of get on a better path for our wellness, is just giving ourselves and giving others grace in that as well.
Oh, I love them. And that last one, I think, is really powerful, because we aren't failing, but we end up failing because we're telling ourselves we're failing. And so, we become what we think and what we tell ourselves, and being really harsh on ourselves. If we've forgotten to drink that water for a few days, ends up where that is our reality, but also the damage it's doing by being very self-critical and non-supportive is then an added problem in itself. So yeah, that's a brilliant one for people to think about. So if anyone wants to connect with you, Sharon, where's the best place for them to find out more about you? And I'll obviously pop everything into the notes as well.
Yeah. So, my website is, I think you'll probably put that in the notes, with the Mental Wellbeing Company. That would be a great way to connect with me. SharonDonato@gmail is, my email. It's another way someone could reach out if they were interested in kind of learning more, having a conversation, a discovery call about, if this approach is right for them. So I'm more than happy to talk with anyone who's curious about it.
Oh, fantastic. And yeah, I'll pop the links into the notes, that if you want to get curious and find out more about Sharon, then just check out her website, and it's got lots of information on there. And as we shared, you've got such a long history of work in sports and, with people in the physical sense and now the mind sense, but also having trained with Caroline Strawson here in the UK and be part of her mental wellbeing group and company as well. So lots of tools in your toolkit, including the brain spotting one as well, which I'm very intrigued about. This wand, it's like a Harry Potter kind of thing in my imagination.
A little
Fantastic.
bit.
Yeah. So thanks for sharing all of your knowledge and passion as well, Sharon. I've really enjoyed chatting and finding out more.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you.